Hey, we're back. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, 1984 Crucial Years in Metal. That was Dio, the Last in Line album, the song Egypt.
The chains are on. Yeah, a little history lesson there.
That's right. Oh, and I don't think we've talked since Mr. Ronnie James has passed, and I'm sure everybody's heard enough, but we just wanted to start the show with,
in honorary fashion to honor a fallen warrior and one of the greatest metal vocalists of all time. Actually, one of the greatest rock vocalists, I would say, of all time.
Totally.
So, and this is a song that sort of caught our fancy as of late. We've been rocking a lot of The Last in Line out. At least I know I have, and I know Mark has a little bit as well. And so it seemed like a fitting way to start a show about 1984, which is our part 5, if I do believe. We've made it to the top 5 greatest years of crucial years of metal.
I think so.
Yeah, it's
been a while. So yeah, we've had a month hiatus or a little over that for Deathfest, and you had some trips.
We had end of the year chaos with me for school and track stuff, and then of course I was in Italy and Greece and Turkey. I'll actually be leaving for Australia soon too. So we're trying to get some podcasts in so we don't have to go back on the hiatus. And plus we took a little time off as we always do when we go to the Maryland Death Fest, which was a tasty treat as always this year. So some good highlights like Pentagram, and got to see Autopsy and.
Yeah, it was pretty unreal.
What was your? Did you have a favorite?
I mean, outside seeing Pentagram was pretty fantastic, but then we got to see Entomb, Nirvana 2002. It's been over a month now since we went, so I'm trying to think of
Autopsy,
the big one. The Autopsy was huge.
That was the first time I ever saw Repulsion too.
Yeah, me too.
It was pretty awesome. I Hate God was pretty tight. As were Black Breath did an awesome job. Watain had some sound issues, but otherwise they were pretty entertaining.
If you knew the records well enough, it wasn't terrible. But if this was like the first time you've ever heard the record, it would have been.
Wasn't a great time to be introduced to them. And then of course Converge were always there.
They keep up in the ante every single time I see them.
Pretty awesome. So, but anyways, I'm Jason,
and I'm Mark.
Yeah, I don't know if we actually introduced ourselves. We're a little rusty. It's been a while, so we gotta figure out how to podcast again. It's like riding a bicycle. But 1984. What's really interesting about this year, I think, of any of the years that we've done outside of maybe 85, is this is really a year where like you and I, we weren't really in the scene at all.
I was 9 years old.
Yeah. I mean, I was 6. I was listening to Huey Lewis or something. I don't even know. Michael Jackson, probably Thriller. Because I think that was big at this time. And so, for us to sort of gain an historical appreciation of this year, this is obviously, these are all records that have affected us, throughout, not just in the year 1984, and I'm sure those of you who are younger out there understand kind of what we mean. Just because we weren't really like in the metal scene at that time doesn't mean we can't appreciate a year like this. Mm-hmm. And this year is interesting from, as I sort of look over the list and some of the records that we decided not to play. This is really like the kind of the birth of sort of mainstream metal is really about to sort of take place, with Quiet Riot and Motley Crue and all that stuff is about to surface. It's sort of the meeting of like classical metal type stuff. The Priests and Maidens are sort of intersecting with the rise of Metallica's and the Slayers, and then burgeoning underneath, which we'll sort of get into a little bit later in the show, you have sort of bubbling to the surface is this whole like underground death metal, black metal, and grindcore scene, which are really
Sodom,
really
Frost, Bathory, Destruction,
Siege, all that stuff, and it's all like sort of just right underneath the surface, and then later on, even the doom metal scene kind of gets its roots laid, thanks to Pittsburgh's Trouble, and
which kind of seemed to come out of nowhere. Really,
I mean, in the midst of all this speed that we'll be talking about, but Dio's like kind of a great ear marker to open the show up with, because Last in Line is his second solo record and kind of two of his really undisputed masterpieces that he started his solo career off with. And he kind of was doing a little bit of everything. I mean, he wasn't thrash, but he certainly wasn't like classic rock either. He was definitely in the metal scene, and he had a metal.
Well, I think a lot of the imagery and the occult edge that he's always kind of had, I think, pushed him further over into that other category. Which kind of, although he did have a decent amount of mainstream radio play, but still, it was always it was different than listen to some kind of like cock rocky kind of record.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so it's an interesting record, because I feel like Dio was like this guy that really was almost like in the middle of everything. He could be like taken by whatever camp wanted him. Yeah. And I
think mutually respected by almost every genre of music. And it's kind of a testament to when everybody that came out of the woodwork to kind of have their thoughts and recollections of Dio and how it affected them. Yeah. So, and we obviously Dio and Pete Steele and all these guys. It's been kind of a really bizarre like last month and a half for like some big time vocalists and big time metal figures. And they were Dio, even though his size may have been a bit diminutive, was sort of a larger than life figure in terms of his positive attitude all the time. He was like one of those he treated
guys,
fans, and he was just like the nicest guy in the world. Always take time, and
he reminds me of like Bruce Dickinson almost in a way. Bruce Dickinson's like almost enigmatic outside of like that. He's just always like bubbly and funny and like happy and stuff.
But I would say Dickinson's got that. He's got kind of an uncontrollable energy though. Dio's was always in check. He never got overly excited. He was always really mellow too.
Yeah. I just think of those scenes in the kitchen from the Metalhead Journey where they're holding the sword and stuff like that. But some of the records that came out that could be kind of fit into this more classic metal sound, or the cock rack sound, which Mark was sort of mentioned.
Yeah, the term I don't even think really came
glam metal, whatever you want to call it. But you had Scorpions' Love at First Sting, which rock you like a hurricane. Van Halen's 1984, which I guess represented a peak for them in a certain sense. You had Stay Hungry from Twisted Sister, which had Burn in Hell and some kind of big radio hits. A favorite of Mark and I, Slide It In from Whitesnake.
Ah, yes.
That definitely is cock rock, though, yes. For sure. You had the first Yngwie, Rising Force, which for some people is a big record, not Mark and I. Matt Rat, Out of the Cellar, Dawkins, Tooth and Nail, the first Wasp, the self-titled, Queensryche's The Warning, Armored Saints, March of the Saints, and then Manowar's Hail to England, and of course Motorhead, No Remorse, which is a pretty good record, for Motorhead. It's not, Motorhead is like pretty consistent. There's not like bad really records during the era.
No.
So, but so again, nothing. This is sort of pre-Poison, pre-Warrant, like the flood of all that kind of stuff. And so, even like a record like the Rats and the Dawkins and the Wasps, which they come from the LA scene, still have a little bit of a metallic edge to them. They're somewhat listenable. They're not laughable completely like you're going to get in '86 and '87 and stuff. So, but where we wanted to move next is to sort of, again, appreciate how some of these classic metal bands from the early 70s, or the 70s and the late, the 70s and the early 80s are kind of starting to really hit their stride right around this point. The band we're going to get into next is Priest, and Priest put out a record. It was tough to probably follow up Screaming for Vengeance, which was, along with British Steel, kind of back to back. Well, Point of Entry's in the midst of that, but even that had Heading Out to the Highway, which is a big hit for them. Priest put out Defenders of the Faith in '84, and it's almost like they didn't follow the exact trajectory that I think fans may have expected them to follow, which was going into more of a commercial direction. It seemed like that's where things were kind of teetering for metal. Quiet Riot was doing Come On Feel the Noise, and Twisted Sister seemed to have hit songs, and it seemed like that's where people wanted Priest to go after You've Got Another Thing Coming. And they put out Defenders of the Faith, which is one of their heavier records, from start to finish, and it's not exactly a totally friendly record, outside maybe Love Bites and a couple different things there, but
it kind of shows you where they're going to go with Painkiller and how they're kind of returned back to the Metallica
ram it down and some of that stuff. Although it's interesting because I say this about Defenders of the Faith, and then of course the very next thing that Priest is going to do in '86 is Turbo. So it's almost like
kind of a schizophrenic era.
Yeah, I feel like they wanted to kind of maintain their roots in the heavy scene, and it didn't work out commercially for them, and so they just totally went the complete opposite direction with Turbo.
I don't even know if it was necessarily any kind of actual thought that they had, because at this time, from the early 80s up until probably 88, 89, they were selling out arenas.
It's true.
Yeah, it could have just been man, we're sick of this. Let's try.
Boredom.
Look at Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Maiden. They a lot of synth.
Sure.
I think that was kind of what's the next instrument we can adopt into the arsenal or something.
We've already done the twin.
Okay, this is a bad decision. We're gonna change it.
But I guess for me, and we talked about this when we did the 3-part Priest shows last summer, is that the Defenders of the Faith is one of those records that I think often gets overlooked. It doesn't get talked about very much.
Yeah.
And so one of the tunes we decided to pull off was the Sentinel. It's kind of a good representation of Priest in that era. And then another, what we're going to play after that is, of course, Powerslave's Iron Maiden. And I'll let Mark kind of talk about that, because you're kind of the resident Iron Maiden expert, I guess.
Yeah, especially since the last 2 days, that's all I've listened to, 12 hours.
Yeah, Mark's doing the Iron Maiden illustration for Decibel. So, and we should probably throw it out there that as this podcast hits, people will have, of course, gotten the Decibel issue that you did with the Danzig cover that you illustrated.
And go out and get that in force so it doesn't become one of the low selling issues.
Yeah. Mark needs to do more of those kind of covers.
I need the ego stroking as well.
Yeah, so exactly. But, that's what we're all about here on the podcast.
Of course,
obviously, because we make so much money and get so famous off of this podcast.
Well, so far I've only seen one disparaging comment about it.
Oh, okay.
Out of everything.
So, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it doesn't even matter. But no, this is the first record with. Geez. I haven't talked much lately. It's, I'm kind of saving my vocal cords. First one with Mr. Nico McBrain.
Is it? Okay.
And I believe... No, I'm talking out of my ass, because he was on Peace of Mind.
He was on Peace of Mind. That's what I thought.
So
okay.
I'm not the resident Maiden expert that I thought I was.
Way to go.
But this was in their whirlwind era where they were basically touring for a year, recording nonstop.
Was there a bigger tour than the Powerslave tour? I feel like that was the peak
that was kind of their big
Maiden. It had the Walking Eddie and everything.
Well, the pyramid on the stage.
Yeah, bombastic.
Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. I think it was the biggest tour up until they did their the Flight 666 thing, where they actually had 60,000 people in an arena and stuff. And
that's insane.
I don't remember where that was at. Somewhere in South America,
but the tune you decided to pick was Back in the Village, which is, I guess, for some people kind of an unconventional tune because it's not one that they play live quite often. But
it doesn't really have radio play. Part of that had to do with the running time of it.
Yeah,
but also it has a funny. I remember when I was living with a couple guys that weren't really into metal, and this is probably this is the early 90s. First living with a couple dudes and playing music all the time, and I was in a huge Maiden kick at this point too. And they're like, "This is a Dance with a Billy Goat" at the end of it, when he's basically the closing lines of the song. So that always stood out. So that's all I hear now when I hear the song.
Oh man, this is
I'd actually like to play the song Powerslave.
Yeah,
because it's I don't know. That's
my favorite song on the record. I think is the title track.
That and Flight or
Aces High.
I'm no Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Flight.
Oh
of the Ancient Mariner.
Okay. Well, and Rhyme.
I'm thinking Flight of the Navigator because I'm listening to a bunch of the new stuff too.
Yeah, Mark's head's all scrambled with Iron Maiden. I can attest to having listened or heard down in the basement where his art studio set up, just like 16 straight hours of like Iron Maiden. It was just it was all Dickinson highs coming out of nowhere. So, but they've got a new record out, which we haven't heard yet, Final Frontier. But
I heard one track, but I actually went back and listened to some more of their last 3 records again, and I think Brave New World is the most long-winded of the last couple. I think Dance to Death and Matter of Life and Death are actually really good records.
Yeah, I just listened to Matter of Life and Death yesterday,
and like production-wise and everything too. But not to get off of that, but I mean, it shows like how. You can put out a seminal record in '84 and still put out fantastic stuff 25 years later.
Yeah, very few bands that can do that.
Very few genres can do that outside of jazz and metal. Yeah, I think the longevity of people just doesn't last.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to get into next is kind of a couple of the classics, 2 of the biggies, Priest and Maiden, and then we'll keep the other 2 kind of a mystery after that. So enjoy the Sentinal from Priest and Back in the Village, or what is it?
Dance with the Billy Goats.
Dance with the Billy Goats from Iron Maiden.
Blood runs everywhere. The figure stands expressionless, impassive and alone, unmoved by his victory, and the seeds of death is sown. Sworn to avenge, condemned to
Escape from Metallica's Ride the Lightning, and Gypsy from Mercyful Fate's Don't Break the Oath, and then of course we heard Iron Maiden and Judas Priest before that. What do those last two bands kind of have in common there, Metallica and Mercyful Fate?
Well, some geographical commonalities with drummers and singers.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And plus just being like a huge, I think, influence on them is King Diamond's is, I don't know about, not vocally or anything, but as far as just that, because King Diamond is kind of an anomaly. Well, Mercyful Fate at this point was kind of an anomaly in that scene where they had a lot of like real heavy metal-ish, British heavy metal kind of tropes, like vocally, but just taken over the top. But musically, I think it was way more. It's kind of more fierce and in your face than a lot of what the new wave British heavy metal stuff was doing.
Well, and it was very dark as well, lyrically,
like
and
as
just,
far as like occult stuff,
even
like,
the tone of it too, and Gypsy, like if you took that song completely out of context and didn't listen to the rest of Don't Break the Oath, it's a brighter song, unlike say like The Oath or Dangerous Meeting or Desecration of Souls. I mean, those are.
Well, and there's they're really kind of goofy intro bits and, stuff where it's almost like, some kind of like excerpt of some seance it's being done. So it's like, it's a very kind of evocative record as far as like really getting you into that kind of headspace of the occult or what King Diamond thought the occult was. Well,
yeah, and I think Melissa and Don't Break the Oath, the first two Mercyful Fates, had as much of an influence on thrash bands like Metallica and Slayer as it did on this like underground scene that was sort of growing and would eventually grow into death metal and black metal. And stuff like that,
for sure.
And it's because of, I think, the lyrically and the thematic stuff and some of the ways in which they kind of put their songs together. They were more epic in nature, but not in like the Iron Maiden epic kind of way, but it was a different sort of way of arranging music sometimes. Yeah,
because I mean Priest has I think Maiden's usually more, if you're thinking of like the feeling you get out of the songs, most Maiden stuff is fairly upbeat. I think Priest has a little bit more melancholy guitar tone once in a while,
especially their 70s stuff.
But then Fate is all over the place. It's like some kind, it's almost like it's like operatic more so than Maiden, I'd say, for sure.
And for sure, with the thing that I think Mercyful Fate brought to the table, which was interesting, is not to say that they're not a blues-based band, but they brought more of almost a classical element. And that comes from their base of operations being in Denmark. And what you always get a lot of times is with some of that type of stuff, you're bringing in more of the sort of classical elements than say the blues-based stuff, which comes from England and America more.
It really comes from America.
And then it was stolen by the British in the 50s and 60s, and then
it was all stolen by the white man and retransposed.
Yeah, exactly. And then Metallica's Ride the Lightning, of course. I mean, I don't know how much we have to talk about how important this record is, but certainly, it's a big step up from Kill 'Em All. I mean, Kill 'Em All is pretty rough. It's got a lot of energy, a lot of heart to it. But outside of like Seek and Destroy and a couple other songs, most of the songs are pretty like short and punchy and pretty simplistic.
And they didn't really have, I don't think they had their identity yet. I think this is the record where they kind of come into their own and figure out how, we're going to integrate like some of these longer, even like instrumentals and, longer epic songs. And it doesn't have to be, they almost had more of a, Motorhead kind of punk aesthetic as far as like song lengths and just like rapid fire on Kill 'Em All.
Yeah, for sure. Even Motor Breath kind of is almost an ode to Motorhead in its own weird way. But Ride the Lightning, this is I got Master of Puppets first, and then I went back and got Ride the Lightning, and I had it on tape for a long time before I found it used on CD. And this album holds up pretty well. The production's a little thin on it at times in terms of the vocal production and some of the balances of the music, which you've said that you've heard some of that vinyl stuff, and some of the vinyl reissues address that a little bit that you've heard, or no?
Well, the Injustice for All, you can actually hear bass. It's subtle, but you can hear bass.
You can hear the bass.
They take the original master tapes and actually tweak them a little bit.
And for
even
sure,
they're pissed at Newstead for some reason. Like, why even have a bass player on the record, really? But it's almost like slamming the guy's dick in a door.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the egos of Metallica and some of the poor decision making they've made, post Master of Puppets. But yeah, it's weird that because the bass is so prominent on Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. You can really hear what Burton's doing. I mean, he even solos on the bass, goes really after it on Call of Cthulhu, which is another song. Given extra length, we would have loved to have played like Call of Cthulhu or Creeping Death or something. But
I think Escape is kind of one that I don't hear played very often. I think it's got a really, as far as this record goes, the vocal melody really stands out as being. I guess it's more I guess pop sensibility to some degree, but that really stands out. Plus, Snot Rocket did a cover of it, which is basically At the Gates.
Yeah,
did a really great cover of that
on the Metal Militia thing.
Yeah, and I think what did Black Sun put that out?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, if you haven't heard that, get a hold of that Snot Rocket cover, because it was funny that as Mark and I were listening to Escape, it's hard for us to like not hear Tapas screaming and some of his vocal fills and stuff. But yeah, and again, these are two bands that Mercyful Fate and Metallica, they're starting to push the envelope forward for a whole new movement of metal that's really starting to arise in 1984. And Mercyful Fate had been there in '83, as had Metallica, but I feel like these are more mature efforts, more focused efforts in a certain sense. Don't Break the Oath is certainly, at least you can say, better produced, a little brighter in a sense. Melissa kind of has more of a evil edge to it, which works pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
But Ride the Lightning, for a lot of people, this is their favorite Metallica record. Some people kind of got oversaturated with Master of Puppets.
That's where I came in at. So that's. I don't listen to it very often. I'll have to say that, but this actually sounded kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
Today.
It's nice to sort of put it on every so often, because I think everybody who is as big of a metal fan as Mark and I has gone through the Metallica phases and just exhausted Metallica, and so take a couple of years off, come back, put on a Metallica record, and oftentimes it's kind of like, oh, cool,
it's hard to, because they had such that absolute shit period for a while. That I don't even want to re-explore that stuff. But like with Maiden, I go back and listen to B-sides, and I don't know how many songs they have, but I have every single album and most singles as well.
Yeah.
So I was even coming through into Diana era, Women in Uniform and stuff like that too.
Sure.
So, yeah. But going back to Metallica, it's like, well, okay, I can only basically deal with these couple albums because I've heard everything so much.
Yeah, and it's again, I'm sure we don't have to talk about the influence and the impact that these guys had, but
yeah,
of course the thrash metal scene is starting to fire on all cylinders. Voivod's War and Pain comes out this year. Anthrax, the debut Fistful of Metal, which featured Dan Lochner, before he went on to Nuclear Assault and SOD and
Brutal Truth, and
now he's
45 other bands.
We saw him play with Autopsy and stuff. And we should also mention 1984 before we go any further and talk more about the thrash. This is the year of Spinal Tap, and there was a big part of us that wanted to play something from Spinal Tap, because
working on a sex farm.
Yeah, there are just so many great things that are associated with Spinal Tap. And if you're a metal fan and you can't laugh at yourself, then you've got some issues, I think.
Oh, if you can't watch Spinal Tap and see how absolutely true it is,
yeah,
that's the thing.
And so, it was an important cultural watershed moment, I think, for metal. That, in a sense, metal started to get some mainstream exposure.
It had been around a while at this point, so people were like, okay, this is actually going somewhere. I guess.
Yeah. So, anyways, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Spinal Tap. But speaking of thrash stuff, the twin titans at this point are Metallica and Slayer. Megadeth is still a year away from putting out Killing Is My Business, and Exodus is sort of in the mix of all this stuff. And then, of course, Anthrax, like I said, just put out their debut, but still not with Belladonna, still not quite what...
It's not what everybody thinks of as classic
Spreading
Anthrax.
Disease is coming soon, but, so Slayer and Metallica are really the two American bands that are kind of holding up that torch. And Slayer makes a really interesting transition this year, and this is the next thing we're going to get into. When they put out Show No Mercy, it was very much rooted in new wave of heavy metal, British heavy metal type stuff. Mm-hmm. It had a little bit of Mercyful Fate kind of stuff. It had a lot of those kind of elements, and then but it didn't have a lot of teeth to it. If you play that record for somebody that's heard Rain and Blood, they're going to be maybe a little bit underwhelmed by Show No Mercy. Now, I love the record for its sort of nostalgic value, in a sense.
I like almost like the grim production value.
Yeah. But what you get with the Haunting the Chapel EP, and oftentimes people don't really talk a lot about EPs, but I've heard this mentioned several times that this is maybe the greatest metal EP of all time, because it was so transitionary for Slayer, and the three songs that are on it are absolute dynamite classics, two of which they still play live often, which is Chemical Warfare and Capture a Sin. And the title track, Haunting the Chapel, just really ups the ante in terms of cult type stuff, or occult, not cult, but a cult type subject matter, anti-religious sentiment, And then even Lombardo's drumming is really starting to like get more advanced, and obviously that's where Slayer is going to be taking all this with Hell Awaits and Rain of Blood and some of those type of records. And so it's a really interesting EP from that perspective, I think, because here you definitely see a band totally making a really remarkable transition. And I was saying to Mark that the Honey in the Chapel, when they went to record this actual song, the producer was like really freaked out because of how blasphemous the lyrics were. And I mean, you know, in '84, you know, so far we've played you, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of teeth to that stuff. I mean, Mercyful Fate has some teeth on some of the other tracks on Don't Break the Oath, but that wasn't a big mainstream record either. And
I think people, like, just listening to Mercyful Fate, they might be a little bit more apt to laugh at them because they're so flamboyant. Mm-hmm. And Slayer was dead serious. They were pissed off, and they were like, they look the part as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so Haunting the Chapel is really like this, it really... It's the roller coaster starting to head up for Slayer, you know. Whereas Metallica is like kind of starting to peak with Ride the Lightning and Master of you know, Slayer's kind of like going to the next extreme almost, you know.
Yeah, I think Slayer, they took their time and they figured out exactly what their formula is, and they've kept it. And but it's a formula that's got enough room to move around that it doesn't get stale. Like Metallica's, you can only go so far, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because it seems like Metallica was always trying to bring in like new acoustic interludes. They were just trying to bring in a lot of other elements, and they
burned like really fast, really quick. You know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, in a certain way, Maiden did that, but Maiden was able to like reinvent itself each time it kind of took its sound, you know. I mean, you said with Seventh Son, they were like, well, let's throw in some keyboards. We haven't played with that yet, you know.
Yeah, which has a decent sound, but you go, I think the key to any Maiden record is it's always that Steve Harris. Yeah, it's centering.
It's got to be rooted in something. You know, it feels like Metallica will come up with like almost a concept for a record, and it's like, let's make this sound like a garage record, like that piece of shit thing they put out, Saint Anger, you know. And it's like they're not really writing Metallica songs; they're trying to make like weird concepts.
Well, it's like telling, okay, go to a rich guy and have him write a paragraph on how it feels to be poor.
Yeah, exactly.
It's disingenuous.
Yep. And then we're gonna open up some more songs after Slayer. We're gonna start with Destruction, and we'll leave the rest Cult and Underground, as you know, metal's gonna start to get a little more extreme. Let's just put it that way. And I think Slayer is a good starting point for where that extremeness begins. So enjoy Haunting the Chapel from Slayer, followed by Destruction, Sentence of Death with Mad Butcher, and then some surprises on the way.
Symbol of life, intimidate the last of Christian more. Speak of death, the words of hate, anticipation grows amongst the dead. Heresy, the priest of death, to bring forth the Lord of the cross. Strike the 12, erase the dead, death comes under attack. Torment the priest, their altar will soon be destroyed. Heaven's power, turning black, the judgment belongs to the dead. Black and magic, infest with lust, Lucifer rules supreme. The crystal ball shows on the face, the last thing that's heard in the sky.
right, that was Siege's Drop Dead with a tune called Drop Dead. That's Celtic Frost, Morbid Tales, Bathory's Sacrifice, Sodom's Witching Metal from In the Side of Evil EP, and then from the Sentence of Death EP, Destruction's Mad Butcher, and of course we started with Slayer. So let's talk about Destruction and Sodom real quick, and we'll kind of work our way out, but these are...
Deutschland.
Yes. Über alles.
Well, between them and, them and Creator, I think that was kind of like the core of what, German metal. And it was weird how all these geographic regions had very similar kind of like, kind of tones really to their stuff. I mean, Sodom is more of the down and dirty version that doesn't go for technicality.
Sloppy, yeah.
And then I think Creator falls right in the middle between them, and Destruction was pure flash.
Yeah, it had a lot of virtuoso guitar.
But then
stuff.
they're also, I think, due to how it was recorded and subject matter and speed, it didn't seem quite so flamboyant and,
Yeah, and
shiny.
you look at the cover of Sentence of Death, and you've got three guys in some of the most ridiculous bullet belts, and
I think they got a deal at Army Surplus Store or something. But that's kind of the first.
It's iconic.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the first big uses of. I mean, Priest had leather, but the whole integration of like, okay, instead of a spiked belt, a bullet belt. What's tougher than that? What's tougher than a bullet? There you go.
I mean, you look at that Sentence of Death cover, and the influence that had worldwide was enormous. A lot of other people started to ape that.
That's almost a blueprint for black metal photos, or any extreme metal photos for that matter.
Yep. And then, Sodom, In the Sign of Evil is kind of an introduction to them. And then the year later, they're going to put out Obsessed by Cruelty, and Sodom doesn't always get the respect that they deserve, I think, because they were so sloppy and so inconsistent sometimes. But you had great records like, Persecution Mania and Agent Orange and stuff like that. And Agent Orange just got reissued, and Decibel gave it a 9. So maybe they're starting to get some... valued attention,
Yeah, I don't know how. Well, Sodom's one of those bands that I don't think, as far as like any kind of like financial way, they never really they didn't penetrate as far in or critical or anything. It seemed like they were they're similar like to Anvil, where every band was like, my God, these guys are unbelievable, but I don't know how many people actually heard it or cared.
Cared about it.
It's one of those kind of guys.
For sure. Sodom's like a band that gets name checked when musicians are like kind of talking about their influences. Sodom, Destruction, Creator. And then we had Bathory, which we've spoken a lot about, but this is the debut from and really the birth of, I guess, black metal in a sense.
As what we know it to be today, I think, for sure.
You had Venom and stuff prior to that, but
circus metal.
And Sacrifice is a funny tune. That's the ringtone that plays when Mark calls me. So that's kind of his song. So
though I think the entire first Bathory record's absolutely fantastic. It's something that you can't. If you're not really familiar with this style of music, I don't think you can penetrate it really easily at first. I mean, it's taken me years to really kind of appreciate it more. But it's a punk rock record with blasphemous vocals or blasphemous lyrics.
Yeah, and pretty crazy vocals as well, And so, I mean, these guys, between Destruction and Sodom and Bathory, and then finally Celtic Frost, these four, well, I wouldn't say four, you can throw Creator in there as well, and maybe even Slayer. But I think almost all the bands that were in this set have... Even if they weren't considered extreme metal, I guess Bathory probably was, but even if they weren't considered necessarily extreme metal, their influence on extreme metal is just probably more concentrated than any group of bands that you could probably throw together.
Well, yeah. This is the well from which it sprung.
Yeah. And Morbid Tales, Are You Morbid, which is the title of Tom's book, right?
Yeah, that's obscenely expensive right now.
Yeah, we've tried to get a hold of it. We hoped our public library would have it, but no such luck.
Oh, Chris is going to let me borrow it.
Oh, he has it? Cool,
yeah.
Cool.
He's going to sell it. And I was like, well, let me read it first.
Let's check it out. But yeah, so, Celtic Frost, Bathory, I mean, again, we've talked endlessly about these bands, but you have to sort of consider them when you talk about the year 1984 and the type of influence that they had. Just on all scenes, black, death, grind.
And a lot of these records might not have even made it to the States at this point. It's probably, because I know Bathory was brought over by like Combat in probably like 84 or 85
probably.
maybe.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about us not having grown up in this year. We can look at it more from a historical standpoint and say, not grown up with the stuff, you look back at it and like, holy, this much stuff came out in this year. That would like I can't imagine like looking back 10 years from now
and seeing this year, I don't think it's not gonna hold up like that.
It's not gonna be. I mean, these are records that truly
what's the roots of a scene that didn't exist?
Genres, entire genres of metal, are being birthed. And speaking of another genre that gets birthed, that last song, which if you
Siege.
blink, you may not have heard it. Drop Dead.
Well, which it's funny the Siege gets I guess so much credit for kind of starting the whole grindcore scene, if you want to call it that. Them and Repulsion a lot.
Yeah.
But they really were basically just hardcore
a punk hardcore band. From Boston.
Which at the time, like the New York scene was a little bit more. It didn't quite hit that tough guy core thing yet, but I think Siege almost had more of the kind of like anarcho-punk crust kind of elements to them as well, as far as.
But it was just faster than anything that had been done before.
I think it was purely speed and between getting like the tape trading scenes and having it degrade over time with being shipped out to people. I'm wondering if that had something to do with its appeal. But
you get guys like Shane Embury and Mitch Dickinson, and those guys kind of got a hold of that, and all of a sudden, whammo, you get Napalm Death out of this, in a bizarre way. And Napalm always name checking Siege, and so definitely worth considering when you talk about important records of 1984.
That's also an expensive record now.
Yeah. I passed it up used at New Moon in the like $3 bin.
I paid $24 for it.
Yeah, I kicked myself for it, but. We're going to end with two records that are kind of unconventional and don't really fit anywhere. And this first record, Cirith Ungol's King of the Dead, features a great cover.
Master of the Pit, one of my favorites.
I'd love to play Master of the Pit. We just don't have time, so we have to open up with Atom Smasher, which is also a pretty killer tune. From Colorado. I mean, again, I don't even really know how to genreify these guys. They have some Sabbath elements, some Doom elements, but then they also have guitar virtuoso, but yet they're
kind of a mess.
Yeah, it's a hot mess. But yeah, like everybody that listens to this, like you listen to it a couple times, you're like, this is an incredible record for 1984.
It's like it sounds like a bunch of kids that are really, really love metal, and they're just going balls out. And there's a lot of heart in it, but there's a lot of there's a lot of feelings, but you can see past it. I think if I heard this back in the day, I would not know what to think.
Yeah, but and then you read about it, and like the liner notes, King Folly from Deceased writes about it, and like I love this record.
That totally makes sense.
And it's got like a great, a lot of people really revere this record, and this is one that's like come up in the last 6 or 7 months as being one of my favorite records. So, and again, doesn't really fit anywhere, the Colorado metal scene, if you will. And finally, a band that was truly out of step with all the stuff we've been playing, which has been remarkably all about velocity and speed, is Pittsburgh's Trouble, and their debut record, which originally was called Trouble Trouble, and then later got renamed Solemn 9. And what can you say about these guys except maybe they kind of really held the very, very dim flame of doom metal as Sabbath was sort of fading away with the Heaven and Hell Dio era.
Well, and they changed so much by then that this sound I don't think was really being captured by many bands outside of
well, St. Vitus put their debut out this year as well, but again, not a
well, I mean, it wasn't like a concrete scene like New Wave of British Heavy Metal or something. It was just these little bands probably picking up their well, it wouldn't have been their father's Sabbath stuff, just picking up Sabbath again or something,
Yeah, and playing, again, very punk rock, playing against the grain, What's the most punk thing you can do is play slow when everyone's playing fast, and so I kind of appreciate that element to Trouble. So we're going to play the title track from Solemn 9 here, and Atom Smasher from Cirith Ungol. We should also mention really quick, because we were talking about Siege, that this was also the year that Swans put out Cop Young God, which had a huge influence on Godflesh, a lot of the earache bands, and Conflicts Increase the Pressure came out as well.
Black Flag's My War.
Yep, and the Minor Threat 7 inches were actually put together for the first time on a CD, so with the famous cover of the guy, the black and white photo. But anyways, let us know what you thought about 1984. Hopefully we didn't miss any big records that you appreciate from this era, or if we did, let us know. But give us some feedback at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Leave us a comment on iTunes, and check out the website. You can order art prints and things on there as well.
Yeah, I'm going to do some stuff with that pretty soon to spice up the site to make it more interactive.
Ooh, cool. We dig it. So, for Requiem Metal Podcast and Cirith Ungol and Trouble, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark, and thank you everyone for your support.
Yeah. Enjoy Atom Smasher and Solemn 9.
For thou, Lord, hast not forsaken those that seek thee.